Todd Phillips' Joker has been called mesmerizing, disturbing, shocking, shallow but striking, horrifying but artful, disrespectful to the Batman mythos, a cinematic dead end and too radical a departure for Best Picture, socially irresponsible, not interesting enough to care about, so stirring it should be required viewing and no laughing matter. And then people went out and saw it. Taking home the Golden Lion at the 76th Annual Venice Film Festival, Joker sparked controversy almost immediately after a Vanity Fair spread in which the director explained his shift from comedy to drama as being in response to what he felt was an increasingly stifling atmosphere coming from Twitter and social media, somewhat foolishly perhaps referred to as woke culture.
The way white women somehow hijack the woke movement.
And since this statement has no basis whatsoever in reality, that was pretty much the end of it. You know, nobody blew it out of proportion or wrote dozens of articles about it. Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Salami used this as an excuse to air some kind of weird old man grievance they have with the MCU, and this amidst a flurry of think pieces expressing concerns that the film might valorize incels or encourage acts of mass violence like the Aurora, Colorado theater shooting in 2012. The families of some of the Aurora victims wrote an open letter to the studio encouraging them to donate a portion of the film's proceeds towards the prevention of gun violence, and while they didn't do that, a number of theaters did ban costumes and face paint, while Michael Moore released a statement declaring that the greatest danger to society would be not seeing the film. And all the while, Jared Leto is apparently trying to get the whole thing shut down so it wouldn't draw attention from his own Joker-related project. And that's when things get weird. An army base in Texas sent out an extremely stupid mass email alluding to credible but entirely unspecific threats floating around the dark web, warning of some kind of an attack opening night. Eschewing anything even remotely resembling self-restraint, the media responded to this with what I can only describe as a deluge of articles reporting and re-reporting on this, speculating and fantasizing and salivating, really, at the prospect of getting to report on an opening night bloodbath. In response to this, a number of mayors and local officials announced that there would be an increased police presence at theaters, and Lord knows that makes us all feel safe. Joaquin Phoenix actually walked out of an interview when a journalist asked him directly if he thought the film might encourage random shooters, after which the press, like a dog with a particularly itchy anus, were barred from the red carpet. And for all that hullabaloo, opening night went off without so much as a stabbing.
What were you trying to prove? That deep down, everyone's as ugly as you.
The idea that Joker would valorize or encourage a shooting, in my opinion, lends credence to the radical school of thought that one should make their criticism of a film after they've seen it, but, well, my opinions have always leaned towards the fringes, haven't they? Joker is extremely critical of the American propensity to fetishize guns, and this criticism specifically focuses on the meeting between masculine insecurity and easy access to firearms. The gun, a .38 Special, is upsetting, jarring when we see it, passed to Arthur in a brown paper bag or resting on his nightstand while he lays curled in the fetal position. He fantasizes about using it to impress women, and the first time it goes off, he's playing with it immediately after his mother says something cruel and undermining to him while he's bathing her?
Everybody's telling me that my stand-up's ready for the big clubs.
But Happy, what makes you think you could do that?
What do you mean?
I mean, don't you have to be funny to be a comedian?
The next scene is Arthur sitting by himself, playing with a gun and fantasizing about using it to destroy a romantic rival.
You're a really good dancer. I know. You know who's not? Him. Sorry, Mom.
That's an odd thing to say. Every time the gun goes off, it's shocking. The blood is bright. There are flecks of gore spattered across the wall when it's used to kill someone. And even when he's assaulted on the train, where it's arguably self-defense, it's used in such a brutal way. Arthur shoots his first assailant in the head, execution style, the second while he's backing away, raising his hands, and the third is chased down and shot in the back while he's running away. Compare this to the way guns are usually depicted in this sort of movie. I know this has been said to death, but Joker, quite simply, is not like any comic book movie I've ever seen before. It's a character study that takes one of our modern villain icons and explores what creates such an individual by way of an origin story of what is probably the most iconic comic book antagonist, embracing this idea of comic books, pop culture, and fantasy as modern mythology. Does Joker valorize the ticking bomb incel archetype? Well, I don't know. Did you find the scenes of Arthur breaking into his imaginary girlfriend's apartment or touching himself in his mother's bed to be particularly valorous?
Sorry, Mom.
No, it does not, and this is as ridiculous as the idea that it could encourage gun violence. First, and most importantly, Arthur Fleck is not a random killer. All of the people he murders are those whom he perceives as having wronged him in some way, and this doesn't excuse his actions, but it does explain them, and that's important because the central messaging of Joker, in my opinion, lies in understanding how and why people like Arthur come to the place he does by the end of the film. Movies like Wolfen and Zorro the Gay Blade coming out put the year at 1981, coinciding the events in Arthur's world with the Reagan-era cutbacks to mental health services in our own. He's like a ticking bomb, reaching out for help over and over, but every time rebuked by the world he would ultimately come to lash out at.
I don't know what to tell you, but you should see somebody. You know, they got programs, city services, stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. They cut all those.
Let's talk about one of the strangest and, in my opinion, most affecting scenes in the film. After Arthur is violently rejected by the man he believes to be his father, and we'll get to that, he goes home, clears everything out of his refrigerator, and climbs inside. This is a pretty odd scene. Some of the people in my theater actually laughed, and I understand why. It's one of many moments in the film that's deeply uncomfortable in such a way you almost need to laugh at. Part of this, I think, is supposed to represent Arthur's childhood. He curls into a fetal position when he's upset because it goes back to those first formative thoughts, so raw as to be more precursor of intuition than proper memory. But Arthur grew up with an abusive mother whom he quite literally never escaped, so it's like he reaches out for that sense of comfort, but the place he turns to is only cold. And I also think this is him coming to a boiling point and trying to cool down, so to speak. But there's also something much more specific the film is referencing here. Coined by writer Gail Simone in reference to a scene from Green Lantern number 45, the term women in refrigerators refers to the trend in comic books for female characters to be maimed, raped, or killed as a goad for male protagonists. This is part of a larger trend in which comic books sexualize, objectify, disregard, or otherwise dehumanize their female characters, seemingly in the interest of serving an assumed het male consumer base. Joker is telling us here that all of the accusations leveled against comic book writers and artists by this trope for their treatment of women is equally true of their treatment of the mentally ill, if not more so. They're disposable, they're used as goads for heroes, they're demonized and caricatured, and these are ideas going into the minds of children that will grow into the future doctors and teachers and cops and politicians who will shape the lives of many vulnerable people. I mean, I know children aren't really the ones reading comic books anymore, but my point is this is a major part of our culture. Art doesn't just reflect life, it imitates it, and indeed often shapes it in the consumption. People with mental illness are often forced to endure substandard medical care despite having greater need than other people. They often lack the community support necessary to navigate the world with their unique challenges, and those who go untreated are 16 times more likely to be murdered by law enforcement. The mentally ill have been forcibly sterilized throughout all the English-speaking world. They're more likely to face sexual abuse than your average American and are the easiest to ignore by a criminal justice system more concerned with protecting property than human lives. Mentally disabled and neuroatypical people aren't just demonized by comic books, they're demonized by society. Literally for a while. People actually used to think it was caused by demonic possession, and of course those who suffered were treated accordingly. Some of this you can chalk up to basic human ignorance, sure, but why is this still happening? We know better now. Why are there people who are clearly ill living on the streets? Why are there all these empty asylums in the United States, and why are the ones still open violent hellholes riddled with theft, rape, and abuse? These are issues of resource management, and we're talking about the wealthiest country in the world. Where is all that money going?
It's day 18 of the garbage strike, with 10,000 tons of garbage piling up every day. Even the nicest sections of the city are looking like slums.
The film opens on Arthur crying in front of a mirror while painting a smile over his face and listening to the radio report on the garbage strike, talking about how it affects business owners and disrupts commerce, how unpleasant it is to smell or look at. When we go outside, we can see the filth and the refuse piled everywhere in the background, especially in the poor neighborhoods. It's the beginning of this gradual accumulation of background details that builds to create an uneasy miasma throughout the film, this air of something being off. Take, for example, the song Smile, sung by Charlie Chaplin and then later by Michael Jackson, two fairly dark figures whose lives were often at odds with the emotions elicited by their art. And then Arthur's stand-up premieres at a club called Pogo's, which was John Wayne Gacy's clown name. All of this just contributes to the impression that we're observing a world where something is off, where something is wrong. In the Batman mythos, the Joker is born in a vat of toxic waste. Todd Phillips' Joker is telling us that in our society, our specifically capitalist society, the toxic waste sinks to the bottom. Look at this iconic shot where industry seems to prop up the wealthy parts of the city and dump its waste where the poor and most vulnerable live. The scene where this is most directly expressed comes just after the refrigerator thing, when Arthur confronts Thomas Wayne in the bathroom during a screening of Modern Times while protesters are outside, clashing with police deployed to keep them from disrupting the wealthy theater guests. For those unfamiliar, Modern Times, another contribution from our boy Chaplin, is a 1936 silent film about the desperation and plight of the working man facing down America circa the Great Depression. An industrialized horror show, Chaplin plays a vagrant whose body and mind are horribly warped by his experience working on an assembly line. The daily routine of being a cog in a machine, twisting his faculties until he can't tell where the machine ends and he begins. He eventually lashes out against the twisted society that made him, accidentally leading a political revolt that's crushed by armed police, before teaming up with this knife-wielding banana woman who's obviously some kind of proto-Harley Quinn. The film is an examination of the horrifying and abusive ways capitalists use a morally bankrupt criminal justice system to force people into pens like the doomed sheep we open on. A bunch of wealthy elites deploying the police to violently keep an angry citizenry at bay so they can put on tuxedos and watch Modern Times in a theater is... well, it'd be pretty goddamn funny if it weren't such familiar behavior, wouldn't it? That relation between humor and fear is actually a pretty fascinating dynamic to examine. Comedy lives in fear's shadow. The first laugh most of us experience comes in the form of relief when your mother or father plays the peekaboo game with you. Horror and comedy are the two genres most equipped to challenge and subvert social taboos, and the film plays a lot with the sort of emotional give and take that comes with this.
She says, "Excuse me, Professor Lewis, I think I might be in danger of failing your intro to Western Civ, and I just want you to know I'm willing to do anything to pass." I said, "Anything?" And she said,
You can see Arthur taking in all the wrong messages from the world, and there are a lot of scenes that juxtapose humor with this upsetting, uncomfortable vibe that can't but make me think of a water-warped puzzle piece trying to fit into a healthy groove. Arthur dropping the gun and making all the sick children laugh, or sticking his thumbs into Bruce's mouth to force a smile onto it. Fuck everybody who complained about this cameo, by the way. This kid is so Bruce Wayne. The only thing I didn't like was that we had to see the Waynes getting shot. Like, it would have been enough just to get the glimpse of the gun while we see the clown turning into the alley. We all know how the story ends. Like, wouldn't it be more satisfying to let the audience fill in the rest? And honestly, I'm just sick of the shot we see in every fucking Batman origin movie where Martha Wayne's pearls fall to the ground. You know this shit doesn't happen with good pearls, right? Like, real pearls are individually beaded so they don't scatter like this. Thomas Wayne is a cheap sack of shit. Though I do think it's important we saw Bruce next to his parents' bodies when we did, and we'll get to that. Moments like Arthur listening to the comic doing this kind of dated edge bro material, seeing this as something to be emulated, is meant to make us think about the way actions or events can have dramatically different connotations when paired with differing ancillary circumstances. Arthur starts dancing behind the curtain, what seems a kind of self-comfort ritual, and the set people are visibly weirded out by it, but then, when viewed from the other side, it seems like it was just part of the show. The crowd eats it up. Then he sexually assaults an old woman right in front of everyone. He forces a kiss on her while she's waving her hands for help, and the crowd whoops and cheers. You can see her visibly upset, just out of focus while the interview is happening, but
Nobody panics. Because that's all.
there's a dichotic, almost mythical aspect to Batman and the Joker, their eternal dance, to the point where they all but don't make sense as characters without each other.
I think you and I are destined to do this forever.
It's like trying to understand cold without heat or dark without light. Stripped to their essence, they represent the two fundamental principles of the universe as we perceive it, order and chaos. Traditionally, the Joker has represented the antagonistic side of this relationship, but Todd Phillips' Joker tells us that this too is largely circumstantial. Let's take a step back for a moment and think about just what Batman is. As a concept, I mean. If a government agency started breaking into people's houses without legal warrant to collect information on them, beating confessions out of people, violating international boundaries, wearing black and putting their iconography on everything, we'd call them fascist, wouldn't we? Is it really a surprise then that the villain of a fascist society could come to be seen as a hero? Who's the bad guy here for Batman to kick around? Arthur? Maybe by the end, but he was pretty clearly made by his environment and you can't beat that up. Penny? Was she really a monster? Poor women abuse their children and mentally ill women make for poor single mothers. Usually a robust welfare state is what addresses this, but...
They cut all those.
It's become a bit of a joke in the Batman mythos, the way villains like Bane and the Joker always have an endless supply of henchmen willing to do their bidding.
Where does he find these guys?
Joker, in answer to such a question, simply shrugs and gestures around at the empty asylums and town-sized homeless populations in every American city and says, there are your henchmen. Everywhere there are people who have no loyalty to society, who have an interest in seeing the world that's been cruel to them come tumbling down. If you want people to honor the social contract, they have to benefit from it at least a little, don't they? Think about the way our own society churns out villains, the way our criminal justice system is essentially a machine that takes petty criminals and turns them into violent criminals, removes a person's ability to find legitimate work and sends them to crime college for years at a time, the way the police are just as likely to hinder you as help you. Society doesn't have to be this way. We have sufficient resources that nobody ever has to grow up like this. We could give every drug addict the celebrity rehab treatment, give every thief enough that they don't have to steal. Why don't we? Why do some people get to grow up Bruce Wayne while others have to grow up Arthur Fleck? Where does the cycle of violence really begin here? Even that name, Arthur Fleck, the lost prince who famously reclaimed his birthright and the German word for stain, carries the air of stolen destiny. Though, while I like the idea that the two children of capitalism are authoritarian fascism and violent anarchy, it ultimately doesn't matter whether Arthur was really the son of Thomas Wayne or not. Everybody deserves to have a chance growing up. It's tempting to say that Arthur is the hero of the story, that maybe the film is meant to point to violent lunatics where they're going to do the least harm. Are you an angry loner with a gun whose alienation from society has left you with an unquenchable lust for blood and no desire whatsoever to keep living? Well, don't walk into a Walmart, take a walk down Wall Street. But this is an oversimplification. There are aspects of Arthur I think we're meant to sympathize with. There's even a certain sense of catharsis in seeing him lash out against the world that has wronged him so greatly. But we're all the products of our environment, and ultimately the how and why of Arthur Fleck matters so much more than whether or not he should be. It's the system that made him, and that's what we should be looking at. Its beneficiaries and the wheels that turn on their behalf.
You see, this is what I'm telling you. The audience is going to go crazy if you put this guy on. And maybe for a bit, but not a whole segment.
Gee, it's gonna work. It's gonna work.
I think it's interesting the way Murray's henchmen keep trying to shut things down, but he doesn't listen. He has to keep pushing it, milking a little more content like the greedy little piggy they all are. Remember, Arthur was going to kill himself originally, but I think he realized looking at that last joke, the killing joke, so to speak, that if he shot himself on Murray's show, the host would only benefit from it.
What do you get?
I don't think so.
When you cross a mentally ill loner with a society that abandons him and treats him like trash!
Call the police,
I'll
Gene.
tell you what you get!
Call the police.
You get what you fucking deserve!
I'm extremely fond of this movie. In fact, I'd even go so far as to say Joker was the best picture I'd seen in all of 2019. And were I to give out some kind of arbitrary and entirely meaningless award for the best picture I'd seen in 2019, I think I'd give it to Joker. Some people found it controversial that Joker lost the Oscar for Best Picture to Parasite, which contained a number of thematic and aesthetic similarities. Like Joker, Parasite is a raw, uncomfortable, and affecting film about the intersection of masculinity, poverty, and mental illness. Both offer insights into the ways in which people living in want will prey on each other as a matter of survival, and both culminate in violent outbursts against wealthy effigies of the social forces driving the protagonist's ills. Also this.
저기 변명할 수 있는 계획도 있고 변호사도 선임할 수 있고 책 보고서 이거 묻잖아 계속 이거
I think both of these films are excellent enough that they're in the good movie club. Beyond that, I really don't see the point in scoring them or giving them arbitrary places on a list, which quite frankly changes according to my mood and the time of day. I can't say whether Joker is a better or worse film than Parasite, though in a certain sense I do think Joker is the more significant film, and if you bear with me for a moment I'll explain why. These are both films concerned with class and with economic justice, and they approach these issues very similarly. But who sees these movies? I mean, everybody does, right? I don't want to generalize. One of the really cool things about film is how wide-reaching it can be, especially now with the internet. Like, one of my favorite things to do in the middle of the night is watch Stephen King movies on Twitch with random Chinese people. Oh, follow me on Twitch, by the way, link in the description. But as much as I think Parasite has a universal, utterly humanist message, I wonder how available films like this really are to the average person. Did you see Parasite in a movie theater? Was it your local theater attached to a mall with cum on the seats, or did you drive 40 minutes out to the closest college town where they have beer and cupcakes at the concession stand? I was Ubering full-time when these movies came out, and I swear to God, there was like a 2-week period where I had somebody asking me about Joker every single night. That's anecdotal, I know, but this was hardly a localized phenomenon. Not just Americans, but people all over the world have adopted Joker imagery as a means of protest against their oppressors. Lebanon, Hong Kong, Chile, Iraq, Moscow, Bolivia, clown masks are showing up at protests against police violence, against government suppression, against unfair working conditions. When I googled Parasite movie protests, I got something about QAnon that was completely unrelated, and a bunch of articles about how the film's producers almost didn't get to give 2 acceptance speeches at the Oscars, but Tom Hanks and Charlize Theron saved the day by chanting up, up, up until the lights came back on. Meanwhile, here are some French firefighters with Joker paint beating the fuck out of cops in riot gear. Now, this isn't to make the very lazy, kind of anti-intellectual argument that what's popular is by definition more significant than what's niche. Not at all. But given that these movies purport to address things like class inequality and the way poverty can turn people cruel, I do think it matters what sort of audience is watching it. And at our current place in time, I think that a film which encourages the proletariat to pick up a brick is more valuable than one reminding the bourgeoisie to be a little nicer to their maids. That being said, I find it distasteful for either of these films about class and economic justice and masculinity to be given a 24-karat statue of a golden man holding a giant sword in front of his dick, at a ceremony in which the wealthiest people in the industry come together in garishly expensive dresses and tuxedos with gift baskets that could pay off your mortgage to give each other awards that inevitably all go to pictures about how important and irreplaceable and transcendent the film industry is. These people standing and cheering when Parasite won Best Picture, these are the same pigs who blackballed Snowpiercer for being too radical, too uncompromising in its messaging. Oscars, Emmys, Hugos, Grammys, these awards don't make progress in art, not really. They're just a stimulant shot for the industry. They use and exploit artists to get a bunch of rich people together, all watching, all spending money, get all these movies in theaters for another week or two. It's like the Super Bowl or presidential debates, a pointless spectacle to keep our time and money flowing into an industry that doesn't need it. Speaking of spectacle, the last 10 or 15 minutes of Joker may represent the most gorgeous filmmaking I've seen in the past decade. Like, this is Melancholia, Blade Runner 2049, Darren Aronofsky, Zack Snyder gorgeous. A lot of people found the use of Rock and Roll Part 2 in the run-up to this cheesy, but I found it perfectly appropriate because this is what Arthur has essentially been being prepared for his entire life. The score is letting us know that this is it. Practice is over, it's game time. Where before he was awkward, clumsy, out of place, now he's smooth, graceful, and utterly self-assured. As natural as the ease of descending stairs opposed to climbing them. Look how much easier this path is. The cops can't stop him, nothing can stop him. It's like the universe is preparing the place for him to step into. He's entirely in his element now. Arthur reclines in the back of the police car after he's arrested the way the stand-up he always wanted to be might recline in the back of a limo or a townhouse after a successful show, enjoying the sight of the system he feels so alienated from burning to the ground. It's horrible and it's beautiful. His final dance on top of the smashed police car is pure revelry. This is chaos ascendant. When we pick up again, we're back at Arkham, and Arthur is laughing at something the audience can't see. And then the camera switches, and it's revealed he's sitting across from his doctor. Remember earlier in the film he was told,
"They don't give a shit about people like you, Arthur. And they really don't give a shit about people like me either."
Now we see her again. She has her job back, and Arthur is getting the treatment he was denied earlier when it might have made a difference. The joke he's laughing at then would be the one he told Murray, that the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Society didn't care about people like him, so he made them care. It's a good theory and totally makes sense given the facts as laid out, but I guess the one teensy tiny problem with this interpretation, this is not the same person. This character is played by a woman named Sharon Washington and is credited as social worker. This one is played by April Grace and is credited as Arkham psychiatrist. They look a little alike. They're both skinny black women with short hair working in a similar field, but they're not the same person. In a certain sense, I think he's laughing at the audience for making this mistake, and I do think it was set up that way, the way Grace's character is revealed in the end. But also for making the mistake of thinking he's the hero of this story, that his actions have made the world a better place or addressed something. And that point is driven home via the second reveal. In most Joker origin stories, Batman is responsible for creating his nemesis. Whatever other details change, it always ends with Batman chasing the red-hooded figure that would become the Joker into a vat of toxic waste. Here, Joker is the one to create Batman. Think about the implications of this, about the riots and two of Gotham's wealthiest, most prominent citizens being gunned down in front of their child. What do you think the fallout would be if something like this happened in our own world?
I'm vengeance.
The birth of Batman represents the advent of fascism, authoritarianism, militarized policing as a backlash to the Joker riots. Arthur is laughing at the naivete of the audience and thinking that he's their clown, that he's taking a side, or he stands for something.
I mean, are you part of the protest? Or?
No, I don't believe in any of that. I don't believe in anything.
There's something surreal about the final scene in Arkham. It seems cleaner than it did earlier in the film, and there's something about the way the light is coming through the windows. I think this is a step outside the film's narrative, that what we're seeing here is the Joker, the avatar of chaos, the one that exists outside of all these little stories, always there, ready to pick up the dance.
Each time I find myself laying flat on my face, I just pick myself up and get back in the race. That's life.
Before we wrap, there's one more thing I want to talk about, and to do so we have to go back to the TV wall we see right after Murray is killed. The first news anchor we hear announce that Murray Franklin was shot dead on live television delivers the news with this little smile on his face, as if he's just a little too excited to fully contain it. This lady seems to keep her poker face better, and as the camera pans out, we see more and more footage interspersed with advertisements, hot cars, breakfast cereal, the Energizer Bunny. Here's a Budweiser beer commercial, and here's Clint Eastwood doing a Just Say No PSA. How's that for hypocrisy? We can see the killing itself play out differently across different stations, all owned by the same network. Here it is in color, here it is in black and white. Here the word fucking is censored, but we still see Murray's brains being blown all over the wall. Here the footage cuts, here we get to watch until Joker is tackled. They have all the footage, but they dole it out in little bits here and there in different formats depending on how they want people to see it. Arthur didn't really stop the people behind everything from profiting when he killed Murray instead of himself, because like the Energizer Bunny, capitalism just keeps going and going and going. It's hard to look at the aesthetics of Joker's violent descent into chaos and not think about the real world parallels. And not just because we've got motherfuckers out there in Joker masks setting cop cars on fire. The problems of Joker's world are the problems of our own, and I think people are finally waking up to that. And just like in Joker, when a riot or a protest or anything newsworthy happens, there is a man or a woman or an algorithm in a room somewhere deciding what information is being doled out where and how it's going to be the most effective. And this is done with a purpose. A lot of the footage I see comes from a place, I think, that wants me to align with property owners, specifically corporate property owners, rather than people who are lashing out in sometimes misdirected, but in most cases I would think entirely justified anger. I see what seems to be a very deliberate bid on behalf of the media to get us to focus on anything other than the simple fact that left-wing and right-wing protesters stormed government installations and violently ejected agents of the state within a few months of each other. I know what some of you are thinking. That's crazy. Those people can't be on my side. But we're entering into a time of chaos, and when you let the clown out of the box, crazy things can happen. Before we go, I'd like to take a moment to thank my patrons, especially Il Caesar and Dios. If you enjoyed this video, please click the red subscribe button so my future posts will appear in your feed. And if you'd like to support my work financially like these commendable individuals, please consider visiting patreon.com/wormshole. When I reach 10 patrons, I'll upload a growing compilation of deleted scenes, including 2 that were cut from this video, one about Alan Moore's The Killing Joke and the other about the evolution of Harley Quinn as a character. Thank you for